Hello and welcome to this edition of Fulton Justice. I'm your host, Yolanda Lewis, District Court Administrator for the Atlanta Judicial Circuit. This program is dedicated to providing you with resources, information, and a closer look at how our justice system works for you. Today's show is all about community service and how many of our judges in Superior Court have embraced the idea of charity as their way of giving back. Community service can be defined as service that is performed for the benefit of the public. For this reason, most people can successfully argue that being a public servant, such as an elected official or an appointed official, or even a general government employee, is an act of service in itself. For the record, community service is not a responsibility or an obligation, but an invested commitment to a cause that's important to you as an individual. Through my own experiences, I've come to understand that service to our community is not simply a gift or a one-time interaction, but once you've become invested, it becomes a simple way of life. For this reason, today we're going to take a rare look into the work and the passion of judges on and off the bench. Up next, we'll talk to Fulton County Superior Court Judge Sean Ellen LaGrua. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Fulton Justice. Joining us now is Fulton County Superior Court Judge Sean Ellen LaGrua, who knows all too well the importance of community service. Judge LaGrua, thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me, Yolanda.
Well, we want to talk about, this show is all about community service, and I know you've been on the bench for a long time. Let's start with your service on the bench. How long have you served, and what type of cases do you preside over?
It's hard to believe it's been almost 2.5 years, and I'm one of our 15 judges that has both criminal and civil. So I have serious violent felonies and then all of the civil and temporary restraining orders, declaratory judgments, those kinds of things.
So you have both criminal and civil?
Correct.
So let's talk about one of the most important things that you do as a judge. What's your proudest moment as a judge?
It has to be my probation program. I've been a big fan of drug court over the years and participated both in DeKalb and Fulton, and so when I took the bench, I decided that I would try some of those theories in regular court. And so my young folks that are on probation or bond have to come back and see me once a month. And the requirements of seeing me are that they write book reports, they have to read 15 minutes a day, they do job logs, they have to be employed or in school, and they have to get their GED. And I'll never forget the young man that came in with his GED certificate, and I asked him if he was proud of himself, and he said, "I really am, but I don't think I ever would have done it." Now he's trying to get into college.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So you clearly do service on the bench, but let's talk about your service beyond the bench. You're involved in a wonderful charity, AHIMSA. Can you tell us a little bit about that charity and your role?
Well, I'm a big animal lover, and when I was the Solicitor General in DeKalb County, I was approached by the director of an organization called AHIMSA House, Dr. Maya Gupta, and it's one of the only kind in the nation. There are very few, and it's the only one in Georgia. It's an organization that supports victims of domestic violence in a very unusual way. 71% of domestic violence victims have indicated that their spouse or the abuser, sometimes spouse, sometimes not, has also abused the family pet. And it's both an abuse situation and a control situation. Many victims won't leave an abusive situation because they're afraid that the pet is going to be the victim of abuse. So AHIMSA House is actually an organization that finds shelter for pets of domestic violence victims while they're trying to transition out of a domestic violence situation. And it allows the victim of the domestic violence to take the children, if there are, or themselves, usually a female, and get out of that situation. So this is, as I say, one of the first organizations, and it's done a phenomenal job. They've had over 700 calls this year alone for assistance, and they work all over the state.
That's an amazing connection to what you do every day as well.
Well, it's interesting when you look at the statistics about domestic violence and animal abuse. Not only do they correlate, but some of your worst criminals historically, Dahmer, Bundy, started off with animal abuse. The other interesting thing is it also can help law enforcement with their cases. If you have a child that witnesses domestic violence, the child may not want to testify or talk about what daddy or boyfriend or whoever the abuser is did to the victim.
Right.
But usually they're not as reluctant to talk about what they did to the pet. And sometimes that's the corroboration a prosecutor's office needs to make their case in a domestic violence situation.
Wow. And so if people want to get involved, first of all, how important is it that people get involved in service organizations, and particularly the one that you're passionate about, and why it's important for them to give back and volunteer in general?
Generally, people that volunteer end up getting more out of their volunteer work than the organization. I know that with my probation program or my work with the HIMSA House, I get more rewards than the organization or the folks get. The other reason is that it's a way to help those that don't have as much in the community. Usually these victims are afraid to leave for many reasons. There's a lack of financial support, there's a lack of familial support, and so anything we can do to give those folks an opportunity to get in a safe environment is huge. And giving back doesn't mean having to give their time or their home as a shelter. It can be donating food, donating time to make phone calls, donating bedding. Any of those things are a way to give back.
Now, as we wrap up, I just want to, it seems like there are similarities between what you do on the bench and what you do beyond the bench. Are there any elements of service in what you do every day, and how do those parallel with what you do off the bench?
Well, I was a prosecutor for many years, and it was a great job and I loved it, but it's a lot of fun to be on this side of the bench and be able to see the successes, see the young folks in particular that do well, that don't get in trouble, and that become engaged members of our society. And I'm hoping that those folks will also give back, either through places like a HIMSA House or in mentoring and working with other organizations that help folks like themselves.
Thank you, Judge, so much for joining us today. Up next, more personal conversations about service on and off the bench with Alfred J. Dempsey. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Today's show is all about service beyond the bench. Judge Alfred J. Dempsey Jr. devotes a significant amount of time and energy and even resources to serving several different nonprofit organizations in Metro Atlanta. Today, Judge Dempsey is here to talk to us about his service on and off the bench. Thank you, Judge Dempsey, for being here.
Good morning.
So let's talk about first your service on the bench. You've been a judge for a very long time here in Fulton County. Did you know, how quickly did you know that you wanted to be a judge?
To the bitter end. I wanted to be a brain surgeon early on, and so I got drafted. I guess if you talk about it spiritually, I was called to the bench by people in the community who felt that there was a need and that I could fulfill that need, and so I answered the call.
And you've worked a lot with nonprofit organizations across Metro Atlanta, and you've done that in your role as a judge. Can you talk about just a couple of the things that you've been proud of as far as your role with nonprofit organizations beyond what we're going to talk about today?
Well, that's kind of like my service is everything from AIDS to zoo and everything in between. But I've spent the majority of my time dealing with organizations that support children in some type of way, from coaching Little League to others. Currently, I'm serving on the board at Families First, which goal is to empower families and to seek to make it better for children, and through empowerment of families and services there. And so we have about 3 or 4 different type of areas where we work. One is stability, where they work with homeless persons to provide stability in family and support. Then there's services to families with children to strengthen the families and provide housing, whether it be temporary or long-term. And we do a lot of liaisons with the court in terms of adoptions and facilitating other services to improve the life of our children in our community through the family, which is really the old-fashioned thing about the community is really the family, and if you can keep families together, you can keep the community together.
Right. Now, I found it very interesting that you're talking about families first. You used to be one of the judges that worked in the family division, correct?
Yes.
And so how does that parallel your work off the bench with Family First? How did that parallel with what you did when you were in the family division?
Well, it's the same thing. When we started the family division, we came up with a holistic way of dealing with the issues that go on with families, whether it be in the context of divorce, child support, child custody, adoptions, and things of that nature. And so it kind of dovetailed together. But actually, the way I got involved in Families First was I'm a legacy. My mother served on the board back in the 60s, and I think I went to Dining for a Difference is the big fundraising dinner. And I went there a few years ago, and it seemed like my mother reached out and tapped me and said, okay, it's your turn. So here I am.
And so let's talk about just in general, I know you work with Families First, but before we get into how people can volunteer specifically with Family First, let's talk about why it's important to just give back to your community and why have you done that?
Well, I was raised to believe that you had an obligation. It wasn't you could choose to do it or not to choose it. You were obligated to work to make your community a better place. That's the way my parents raised my grandparents, and everyone in my family thought that way. And of course, most of the folk I grew up with had that kind of mental attitude. And so it was, you wanted to do well for yourself and for your family, but you included the community as part of your obligation. And so I can't see where I could not be doing something in the community. It just wouldn't feel right because I'm obliged to do so.
Well, certainly, and you're clearly passionate about families. You're clearly passionate about the work that you're doing with Families First. How can people get involved in volunteering with Families First?
They can go to our website. It's www.familiesfirst, one word, familiesfirst.org. www.familiesfirst.org, and you can talk about seeing what you can do to be a volunteer. You can provide financial support and learn about the things that are available. So you may even be able to assist other people in the community where you can direct them to the proper services that can assist them. And we do a little bit of everything.
And one of the questions I've asked Judge LaGrua, and I'll ask all of you who are joining us today, is that there's an element of service to what you do on the bench. What's your proudest moment as a judge?
Doing adoptions. That's the thing that really makes me feel good, because it's like one less child that's going to be out there alone and without support. And so every time I do an adoption, it sustains me. A lot of the other stuff we do is necessary and critical to the welfare of the community, but adoptions are really good.
Yeah, and so how many adoptions, is there a memorable adoption that you've had, like one child that really sticks out to you, or is it just in general, it just makes you feel good to be able to place? Every time? Every time,
and I've had numerous kids come through, and you see they're just so beautiful, and you see the love that emanates between the adopted parents and the children, and it kind of makes the rest of it doable.
Right. Any final thoughts about giving back to your community?
You need to do your part to make your community better, and if you don't, you're part of the problem.
When we return, we'll speak with Fulton County Superior Court Judge T. Jackson Bedford. Please stay tuned. Welcome back. If you're joining us now, we're discussing the importance of volunteerism and work of the Superior Court judges beyond the bench. Joining us now is Judge T. Jackson Bedford, Jr., who has proudly and bravely served our country in the armed forces. Welcome, Judge Bedford.
My pleasure.
Well, we're going to talk about your work on and off the bench, but first of all, I have to acknowledge that you have on a great tie. Tell us a little bit about these ties that you wear.
Well, I think that everybody will recognize who I look like as Santa Claus. I start growing my beard in July, and I am Santa Claus for the Battered Women's Shelter on Christmas Eve, and I'm Santa Claus at Eggleston Hospital on Christmas morning. And then I go out to the USO at the airport and greet the troops and the families and all out there as Santa Claus.
Right.
So one of my traditions is that as of the 1st of December, I start wearing Christmas ties. And I know my wife doesn't like it because the closet's full of them, but I have a different tie for every day. Okay, and that's kind of been my tradition. Now, sometimes I wear the same tie twice. But today, the Santa has an American flag. So since we were going to talk about veterans issues in some respect, I thought it was appropriate.
Right. So talk to me a little bit about your service on the bench. You've been a part of the judiciary for a while. What other opportunities have you taken on in the legal community?
Well, before I was on the bench, I was president of the Atlanta Bar Association. And after going on the bench, I moved out of that about a year or two before I went on the bench. And I was president of the Atlanta Bar Foundation. And I've also been president of the Emory Law Alumni Association. And I've been very involved in the legal community from the very beginning. And I know from your prior interview with Judge Dempsey and all that you talked about service, and that's part of what we're talking about today. And one of the things that I say to young lawyers is I say be in service. It adds a dimension to your life that you can't get just by practicing law. And I say give back to your community, give back to your profession. We have that obligation and responsibility, just like Judge Dempsey said. And I was brought up in a family, my father was a career naval officer, and I was brought up about service to the country and to the community. So way before I was on the bench, I was involved in the legal profession because that's where my commitment has been. And of course, I've expanded it, and I'm involved in children's issues and things of that nature too.
Right, and that's a good segue into your service in the armed forces. Can you tell me what branch you served in and what rank you obtained while there?
Right. Well, I went into the United States Navy. I spent 4 years as a midshipman on a scholarship at the University of Virginia. Then I spent almost 5 years on active duty, and I attained the rank of lieutenant. And I flew. I was what was called a naval flight officer, and I was a weapons officer on this particular plane. And I flew in Vietnam and flew off of an aircraft carrier and spent almost a year on the carrier and 6 months on line flying off the coast of North Vietnam.
Okay, and tell me a little bit about the service. I know you've served in the armed forces, but how are you still involved with veterans today?
Well, I'm a member of the Atlanta Vietnam Veterans Business Association, and we formed it back in the late 80s to say to the community that not all Vietnam veterans are ne'er-do-well, so to speak. I mean, I hate to say that, but you know, they're not drags on their community, that they're actually giving back, and they're people that have been successful in business, successful in government, just successful in their lives. Because at the time, a lot of people didn't look at Vietnam veterans that way. We were very much looked down upon, and I'm sure part of the audience remembers some of what we went through. And so we formed this organization to speak back and then to honor our own. And so we do a memorial every year for one of our fallen comrades. And the important part of this is we bring in the families. And the families get to meet the men that their fathers, husbands, grandfathers served with. And so that's an important part of our outreach. Now we do other things too, like we have some lawyers that work at the Veterans Hospital and do legal services. We do other things to support the veterans community and bring attention to veterans issues. and then I'm a judge in the Veterans Day Parade, which doesn't necessarily help anybody, but it's fun, and it helps. It focuses on how important our veterans are, and I participate and contribute to that, and so I do those types of things just when called upon.
Right. And so we're still involved in conflicts across the world as we speak. And so what would you offer, what kind of encouragement would you offer to families who have family members who are actually actively serving in the armed forces?
Well, it's a different world today with communication, but communication has to be positive. And you've got to be supportive of them and be very positive in your communications. When I was serving, it took 2 weeks for a letter to go to the United States and 2 weeks to get back. And that was very stressful. We didn't have instantaneous communications. So I would say that be there for them, be supportive of them, let them know that you care about them, because when you're in a combat situation, you can't be thinking about other things. And if you have problems at home and difficulties with people at home, then you're not focused on something that may end up in costing your life. Right. And so please be supportive and give the love that these people need. And of course, when they come back, all of us need to be supportive of them too.
Absolutely.
And that's what we're trying to do, as you well know, with the Veterans extension to like a semi-veterans court that we're working on.
Absolutely. I think it's going to be an important element.
And I think so too. And I'm hopeful that I can contribute, and I've already been in touch with other veterans by bringing veterans together that could provide mentoring for the folks that go through our program. Right. And I think we spoke about it before. We all, I believe, as a veteran and as a society, we know an obligation to help these people that have gone out and paid a price for us, help them reintegrate in some way, and give them special treatment. I don't mind saying it. I think they have special issues and problems, and we need to be aware of that and help them.
Right. Well, Judge, thank you so much for all of the work that you do in our community. Thank you for the work that you do on and off the bench. And thank you for being here today.
Well, my pleasure, and thank you for doing this. I think this is great.
Up next, I'll share some final thoughts on service. Stay tuned. Today we welcomed 3 distinguished members of the judiciary to discuss their passion for service and acts of charity in Metro Atlanta. Each guest gave us a unique snapshot of their passion for service and their lasting commitments to an important cause while embracing the concept of a shared community. Community service is not always convenient. With our busy lives, it can often be hard to find time to volunteer. However, the benefits of volunteerism can be self-gratifying and offer an intrinsic sense of investment for you, your family, and most importantly, to your community. While service is important, it is often only a rendering of your time and talents without any expectation of compensation or recognition. But you should know that your contributions will always be of value and will always exceed any monetary award that you could ever receive. Although not required, we appreciate all of the judges who find time to use their voices to help others. And if you would like more information about the 3 nonprofit organizations mentioned today, you can contact the organizations listed on your screen. Special thanks to all of our guests today, and thank you for tuning in to Fulton Justice.